Awesome. Give everyone one more minute to get in here. Okay, let's get it started. So hello, everyone. Welcome to part one of the executive workshop series powered by Zappos. We are excited to offer a learning opportunity for our members and provide takeaways that will hopefully bring positive mindset change and results to your business. We'll get into a quick summary of what to expect in the moment, but first I'd like to make you aware of your host today. So I'm Ashley Grant, the Director of Experiences here at Forbes Councils. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Corey Jones. And we'll just be here to make sure the experience is going as smooth as possible. And should you have any questions, just ping us privately and we'll be happy to help. Not related to the content anyways. And please do meet your workshop host, Pravir Malik. He is the head of organizational sciences at the Zappos family of companies. And he is really excited. He's really excited to get into all that we prepared for you today and for the remaining sessions. So here we go. So as many of you know, I believe 97% of you signed up for the entire workshop. And it's a three-part series, right? So today we'll be covering part one, company and market behaviors, and 2 weeks we'll do part two, and the following 2 weeks we would do part three. So we do encourage you to attend all parts in order to be eligible for the certificate, and we're just really excited to get into all of it with you. So you should have received a calendar invitation for all three parts if you signed up for all three parts. And that would have come from experiences@forbescouncils.com. If for some reason you didn't get a calendar invitation for the other parts, just ping me or Corey privately and we'll make sure that you get that calendar invitation, okay? So today's agenda is going to be around 10 to 15 minutes or so of Pravir and I going back and forth. Pravir mainly covering, the content and the meat of the information that we'll be learning today. And then we're going to open it up to, the executive workshop portion of it and more of like a Q&A, a discussion. And we just ask that you raise your hands. All right. So we will keep everyone on mute for the entirety of the time unless called upon, so that we can make this as simple and organized as possible. And then to wrap it up, we'll recap and we'll provide some resources and we'll preview the next session that's to come. For a successful virtual experience, please abide by the following guidelines. Remain on mute. Type any questions or relevant comments in the chat, please. We'll try and monitor it there and address it if we can. Limit distractions from the information being provided. Let's just try and stay on topic. And please do be brief and respectful of everyone's time and allow for the host and staff to keep the experience on track. Alrighty, let's begin. Okay, so Pravir, would you like to, I'm going to bring up our slides in just a moment, everyone. Sorry about that. Pravir, would you like to give a preview of just the entire, the entire deck, if you will, right? What we should expect from this entire executive workshop series experience.
Sure, Ashley, thank you. So welcome everyone, and I'm Pravir, as Ashley said, Head of Organizational Sciences at Zappos. And essentially what we will be going over during these 3 sessions is what I think are the fundamentals of organizational sciences. And when I think about organizational sciences, really what it is, it's a systems thinking approach to try and create a more resilient organization. And it's based on this foundation of complex adaptive systems. And in a complex adaptive system, there's a lot of, so if we think about our current environment and all the change that's happening along so many different dimensions, that really creates a lot of complexity. And the question is, how do we adapt to it? So what we're going to go over in this 3-part series is really the first part. Just think about, how can we as an organization view the market differently to allow this adaptability to be built into that very process of planning itself, and then allowing that flexibility to kind of dovetail or go further into the organization. And so parts 2 and parts 3 of this series will look at building flexibility in the organization such that it can cater to this very volatile or changing market that we're all in at the moment. So just very briefly, that's what we'll be going over in the 3 parts. And basically in what you see here and is 4 levels. And this is how we've configured our approach to building resilient systems. And part 1, which is what we're going through today, is more of the market level services and some of the organizational level services. And then part 2 is the team level services, and part 3 is the individual level services. And so we'll get into some of, before we get launched, I want to spend a few minutes on complex adaptive systems, what they are, why they're important, what are some characteristics of complex adaptive systems. And that'll kind of set the foundation for just thinking through planning and each of the other parts that we're going to go through. So when we think about complex adaptive systems, there's many examples that exist around us. And here you'll see 4 examples that exist at different timescales. So we have a city that's a prime example of a complex adaptive system. And usually a city, the timescale may be from 100 to several hundred years typically. We have ecosystems which may be hundreds of thousands of years old. And then when we look at economies, we have the time scale of this example of the complex adaptive system, which may be from 10 years to a few decades, generally speaking. And then a civilization is another example of a complex adaptive system where it may last for several thousand years at best. But one thing about each of these complex adaptive systems is they have something in common, and that's what I want to draw out in the next few slides. What is it that's common about a sustainable complex adaptive system, and what can we really learn from that in our own functioning? So to summarize the key, this is just a summary model, but really what drives sustainability of complex adaptive systems is 2 scales. So one is what I'd call a sublinear scale, and the other is a superlinear scale. So when we think, and I'm going to refer to this graph here on the right-hand side, but let's think about a city. Now, if we have a city and as it grows in size, then to service a larger population, you may have just a less and less number of, say, gas stations that are required to service a larger city. So there's some kind of economies of scale that's happening, and that gives an advantage. So as a system gets larger, then typically a key aspect to its sustainability is this economies of scale. But also what's happening in a city is that there's a lot of innovation that can occur, because as the population increases and as the diversity of a city increases, then there's more organic interactions that take place, and that drives innovation in general. And that aspect of scaling we refer to as superlinear scaling. And if you look at this graph here on the right-hand side, what really drives the sustainability is the differentiation as
an important message for Timothy Trevino.
as
To
the
verify
organization
recent
grows in
activity on
size, as an organization grows in size, this differentiation between the sublinear and superlinear is what creates sustainability of a complex adaptive system. So that's kind of like the underlying model of what drives sustainability in general. And if we go to the next slide, then this is how we recognize that we're in a complex adaptive system. So this is broken up into two areas. One is structurally, and second is the kind of dynamics that we would see. So structurally,
Sorry, really quickly, Pravir. So what you're saying
yeah,
is, so as far as complex adaptive systems go, right, they're looking for their business to become one, right? They're looking for their business to become sustainable and to have the structural and dynamic characteristics, right?
yes, correct, yes,
Awesome.
yeah, yes. And so, the way that we know we're moving towards a complex adaptive system, so structurally is, ideally we have, so the first point is just, there's a single organization with truly decentralized control, meaning there's many different centers of power or of innovation within that organization. There's typically a high degree of interaction, both within the organization and outside. But one of the most important things is that it's all bound together by a cohesive culture. And that kind of provides a continuity no matter what's happening. And also there's something that we would begin to observe is that there's co-evolution between these parts that are disconnected or that operate independently, is that they would tend to, in a sustainable complex adaptive system, they would tend to grow in sync with each other. So that's structurally how we would begin to recognize that we're on that path. And then I'm just going to go over some of the dynamics real quick. And you may have heard of this phrase of being out of equilibrium, but it's essentially when there's a lot of different crises or challenges, and I would say much like our environment today, that come to the surface, and it seems like things are going to go out of control in some respect. But a complex adaptive system actually thrives on these out of equilibrium states because it's an opportunity to reconfigure how things work in the complex adaptive system. So anything that's truly operating as a complex adaptive system would thrive in this out of equilibrium state. And some of the things that would happen are, for example, like there would be increasing creativity that would be unpredictable. And that's that second point here. Or the organization or the city or an organization would look different, but the core of it would remain the same. And that's, so we would expect those kind of dynamics to come into play a lot more. And actually, if we can move to the next slide in the interest of time. Okay. So here, I want to just draw your attention to, there's three different levels over here. So there's the red, I'm going to focus on this green level first, which is the corporate level. But the interesting thing here, what this slide is getting at, that, in the beginning, I pointed out that there were different complex adaptive systems at different scales. So you have, civilizations, you have economies, you have organizations, but they all have things in common with them. So one thing that's common with any complex adaptive system is that it has a diverse sources of innovation. And roughly these columns here, there's a innovation that drives from an area that we can call knowledge. There's innovation that can drive from presence and detail orientation. There's innovation that can drive from ability to execute and the power that an organization has. And there's innovation that can derive from harmony and how the organization operates internally. Now, if I focus on this green segment here, this was a study done about 5 years ago of organizations that were considered to be some of the best places to work at, and that were also doing very well financially. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the core values that those organizations had, the core values were split so that they covered all four of these areas that create that pattern, that's this fourfold basis of sustainability. And so, for example, at Zappos, in the knowledge area, one core value is pursue growth and learning. In presence and detail orientation, it's be humble, and so on. So we have these naturally occurring core values that cover all the areas of innovation that occur in any robust, sustainable, complex adaptive system. Now, I just want to, quickly before we move forward, draw your attention to the fact that this pattern can be observed at different scales or different levels of granularity. So they exist in any physical, chemical, or biological system that's sustainable, truly sustainable. You see the same division between these four areas. So if you think about the operation of a cell, for example, any kind of plant cell or living or human cell, there's four of these, what I'll call core values or core operating principles that you recognize as nucleic acids, proteins, polysaccharides, and lipids, but they're actually this organization principle of knowledge, presence, power, and harmony, respectively. And then if we look at a civilization that, here I just took out a couple of examples of civilizations that have been in existence for like 5,000 years at some point. And we see also that society is structured such that there's a division amongst these four areas as well. And so this fourfold basis of sustainability is something that I think is really important as we think about how do we create sustainability going forward in an organization, and we can come back to it in the Q&A part.
So Praveer, for an organization, how does a business or an executive leader know when there's an issue, in terms of the fourfold, and if they're not receiving flags from somewhere, such as employees or something like that? Like, how can they find the issues that are happening, or how do they figure out, okay, my knowledge or the harmony sector of the business is off? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question, Ashley. So first of all, I think that every organization has different categories of metrics that it usually monitors, maybe weekly or monthly, or depending on the organization, and these are simple things like your financial results, or how people are doing in the organization, or what kind of customer feedback you're getting. And if any of those are off from the expectations that you have, then already that there's some kind of issue that the organization is facing. And now when we think about this fourfold model of sustainability, the question is, if we were to look at, say, something that's going off on the financial side, then the question is, do we have the sources of innovation that derive from a larger portfolio or not? So we would do an inventory of what kind of things drive innovation in the organization, or what kind of capacities do we have amongst employees, or how well do teams operate. That'll give us insight into, say, the harmony aspect of an organization. But the point being is that when something begins to go off from a metrics point of view, that's the flag. And then the approach, or systematically trying to figure that out by keeping in mind this fourfold order of sustainability that we've seen time and time again exists in a sustainable organization, is, I think, a tried and tested approach to addressing what may be off.
Thank you.
So here I want to give. So in the kind of environment that we are in today, and also what we faced several times during the last decade or so, and especially when there's financial crises or other kinds of crises, then a lot of our assumptions about what's happening in the market get torn apart, and it becomes very difficult to plan as to exactly what an organization should do. And one approach that we've experimented with at Zappos, and I wanted to just speak a little bit about, is this notion of really, if you will, like deconstructing what you're offering. So here, what this little picture is telling us is that if we think about our offering, there's a set of products that contribute to that offering. There's some channels that we might offer those products through. There's suppliers that we rely on to provide parts of the products. There's competitors that we need to consider when we're planning. There's different customer issues, and then could be some other X factor, and we just call it the job segment here. But the point is that rather than go through a robust planning cycle, or rather a planning cycle that people spend a lot of time on, say once a year, this paradigm is suggesting that we deconstruct what we're offering and then combine different aspects of this offering. So for example, we might take pricing so our sources of internal differentiation might be marketing or merchandising or site design or pricing, for example, amongst other things. So we could take some kind of combination of pricing applied to a product, subjected or distributed in a particular channel, rely on a particular supplier, and that's one experiment that we create. And likewise, we create lots of different experiments that we then push into the market and just see how these experiments perform. And then based on the data we get back, if we can just pull up the second part of this. Based on the data we get back, we can then in real time reconfigure the direction that we're going in. So I just want to contrast that this is a much more granular approach to what I'd call it's kind of like micro planning. It's just setting up experiments and then pushing them out and then seeing what results. And this second graph here is really just showing, for example, how experiments can be diversified. So suppose we find that this experiment here that has a combination of this product, this price point, this channel is doing very well, then we can diversify that. So we can try and create 2 or 3 different experiments related to this key experiment. So for example, we might change some features about the product, or we might change the price point slightly. So we launch a few other experiments since we know this one is doing well, and then we kind of see which one of those experiments are doing well. And in that way, if there's also experiments that are not doing well, we kind of cut off that line of approach or looking at the market. And in this way, you kind of like organically are able to respond to the market in real time and able to maneuver or sense as to what's happening in this environment where you don't really know at a macro level, how to plan, but just by running these small experiments, it becomes much more tangible. And the other aspect of planning is simulations. And I would have loved to have shown the simulation, but it takes too much time. So this is just a snapshot of it. But in the environment, or rather than invest a lot of dollars in a market, in a real experiment, which may get sunk really quickly, what we could do is we could run simulations which allow us to model what might be happening in the market, and then get a sense for if the market responds in X, Y, or Z manner, how we should change things internally to benefit from it. And in this particular simulation, what we try to do is we try to understand, which of our core values might have maximum impact on the business, or what combination of core values. And I'll just roughly say that there was a baseline value of the business that over 10 years was projected to grow to, say, $50 billion. And then that's reflected over here as this red line. But if the core values are off, or if our core values aren't operating in the way that they should, then we can see a massive drop off in the value of the company over 10 years. And so, this becomes interesting also from an internal communication point of view to show the impact of uh, different sets of core values, or how we may need to make them all sync together in order to go deeper into whatever we're trying to do in the market. So simulations are really powerful from that point of view. Oh, see, we can't hear you. Actually.
Oh, sorry about that. So I know that this was a lot of information for all. I know that, as we've been speaking about this subject, I continuously have questions for you, and I just think that you're amazing at what you do. And it can be very much a deep dive if you don't kind of put a handle on it. But how do you begin, right, to even plan in such a market such as now, with everything going on, and I kind of go back to that harmony. I remember you saying, like, a city has harmony, by the police and the healthcare system and the transportation that all work together and kind of keeps the daily life going. And for businesses, it's a whole, it's employees, and it's the product and the service and so on. But when there are external factors that you can't control or you can't plan with, what happens then?
Yes, so I think that it comes back also to the question that we had talked about earlier, but it's really this thing of becoming aware of the signs that show us that something is off. So for example, if the crime rate, I'll talk about a city, if the crime rate goes up, then we know that that city is not operating as a sustainable, complex, adaptive system, because ideally that shouldn't be going up. Or if we look at a organization or a business, if the revenues are continuing to decrease over a period of a few months, then we know that that organization is not operating as a complex adaptive system, because if it was, then the revenue stream would not be affected to that manner. And does that kind of like get to what you were?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'd like to now kind of transition into getting the audience involved. I do see a bunch of stuff in the chat. Thanks, guys. And yeah, so we've got people from LA, Brooklyn, San Diego, Tampa, New Jersey, Chicago, Las Vegas, Charlotte, Fort Worth. Awesome. Love it. So we're crossing time zones here. Did I see Dubai? I think it's 4 o'clock in the morning there. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm really happy to have you, and I'd love to get into your questions now. But first, I'd like to pose a question for everyone, and that's so an organization, you said that was supposed to do an inventory of what their innovation, their sources of innovation are, and asking themselves what makes them unique, and who would like to share, what makes your organization unique. And if we can use the raise hand, that'd be awesome. Oh, Shlomo?
It wasn't in reference to that question. I think I had raised it prior to that. It was in relation to, like, one, I like the presentation and the content. I kind of find we're in a new scenario where pressures in the market that we're facing are temporary. So when you do your simulation, it takes into the fact and doesn't know when that temporary finishes. So you might actually not go down the path that would be opportunistic for you had the pressure not existed. Look, there are constants and temporary. We know a virus is temporary. So how do you handle, within the context of this defines us, how do you find that out when pressures that you're facing are just a general decline within everything that's going forward? Because the markets themselves are decreasing, economies are slowly decreasing. How do you use that virtualized environment to say, is it because of my choices or culture, or is it because of a temporary pressure that's making everything look poor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there's a couple of ways that I would think about that. One is that if we do have more detailed market data or competitor data, understand how the market is doing in general, then we can always compare how we're doing relative to the market. If that data is not available, then I would throw out as a possibility that if we're operating as a complex adaptive system, truly sustainable, then we should have the ability to make a market, or to shift the way a market is evolving by our choices in product set or the way that we offer services. And so that is always something that an organization has control over. And but it requires the operations to be, I think, at a certain level of maturity to be able to dictate the direction of the market itself. So that's the other way that I would probably suggest handling this situation is, if we're unsure whether it's a systemic issue or something that's just because of the way that we're making decisions, is try and make something happen in the market and see how that responds.
So I have a really great question here, Pravir, and I'm going to kind of go back between some of the questions in the chat, and then also from live people who have their hands raised. So someone asked, oh, I just scrolled too far. Someone asked, what is a decentralized? Why is a decentralized a sign versus being centered as a company? I'm having a hard time understanding why that would work better from a high level.
Yeah, sure. So I think that one way that I would think about that is that if we have, so decentralization, we can also think about it in terms of having, depending on the size of the organization, this may make sense or not. But if it's a larger organization, then decentralization could mean that we have different centers of creativity within that organization, so that if something were to happen to the market, then we can switch. So if we commonly approach the market with one approach always, or offering one kind of service or a service in one manner, we can switch to something else. And that becomes more difficult if we're completely centralized, and if our thinking is uniform across the organization, it'll generally be more difficult. And what we see happening in kind of in nature, or in robust cities or civilizations in general, is that the reason they're able to sustain themselves for hundreds or even thousands of years compared to an organization that typically won't last more than 20 years, and that period is going down, is this kind of like ability to tap into these different sources that exist within it. And typically decentralization just is a surrogate to understand if the organization has a distributed kind of capacity for innovation.
Thanks, Pravira. Did that answer your question, Kelly, or did you want to expand on that?
It answers it close enough. I wonder how that would work with companies who would struggle with the decentralization versus not, because of the bigger picture and how it interplays, because there's obviously a higher level and larger companies that have to make decisions with budgetaries. But I also see how the decentralization can really cause for that kind of mythology to apply quicker and adapt faster. I think it would just depend on the culture that would really play into that. But it did answer my question much better. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Let's go to Siriam, who has his, or the hand raised. I'm sorry if I butchered your name.
No, that's fine. Hi, Pravir. Thanks very much. This was very, very fascinating. Thank you for this talk. One of the ways that we believe leadership interfaces with complex adaptive systems is that complex adaptive systems behave differently from linear systems, and so data moves and changes in a different way. But our instincts are very linear as human beings, as leaders, and leadership development is about honing your instincts to how data is going to change. And you showed that fascinating slide on pricing movements, and that's exactly it, right? If you are in a CAS, then you expect price to move in a different way with your decisions. I just wanted to say thank you very much. That was very illuminating. We happen to be in a similar, what we do as in our company is we use custom built simulations. We build custom built simulations for organizations using complex adaptive systems as our base, and then we use them for leadership development at those firms. So I would love to connect with you afterwards and probably have a longer discussion with you.
Thank you, Shriram. I would love that. And also, I'll mention one thing. It triggered a thought when you were speaking, which was that essentially, I wanted to point out that parts 2 and part 3 that we'll be going through in this whole series, also address the notion of, as the market is changing, how do you kind of change or develop leaders at different levels in the organization. And so that's something that we look at in a little more detail from a complex adaptive systems point of view as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Sure. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Let's go, Dedra Ward.
Hi, my question is for a company that has really been focusing on the last, say, 1.5 to 2 years on huge transformation and is on the downslope of that and starting to refocus on the market, innovation, product, what are some critical considerations that you would say we need to make sure and look at as we're really putting the strategy together for how we're moving forward and do that? I think my company's in a really unique spot to be able to be the size and scope that it is, but in ways start over.
Yeah, so I just have a couple of thoughts on this related to some of the slides that I had presented earlier. And, essentially, I think that if you have that opportunity to start over or to begin to really look at how you're doing things and you're in a good position already, then, certainly I think the notion of just experimenting, so running small kinds of differentiated experiments to test out what the market is really going to react to is something that I would suggest. And again, I don't know the kind of business that you're in. And then the other thing also is that I'd come back to this notion of simulations. I think that's a nice way to just test out the market without spending a lot of money. But again, sometimes if you don't know, how things are changing, that could be difficult as well. The third thing that I would say is that, depending on the size of your organization, you already have lots of different capacities of innovation that exist, through the people that work there and through any kind of diversity and the way people view markets. And the question is, to what degree can you kind of mine that information or that capacity more and more in real time to get a sense of, how you might want to play with the market. So these are just some thoughts that I have.
Thanks, Pravira, and thanks, Dedra. Let's go, Patrick, next, and then I'll choose one of these comments.
Thanks, Ashley. Really great talk, Pravir. My question is about how do you balance the need of decentralization? I really like the points you were making about how it leads to spurs of different innovation with the fact that you need focus when you go to the market. So to give you a bit of context, when I came on board to my current organization, they were doing kind of what you were saying, running weekly experiments, trying to test out a lot of ideas. The funny thing is, when I came in and applied a focus of 3 main areas, as opposed to, I think they had about 20 or 30 experiments, suddenly we got a massive revenue increase. Now, in my mind, obviously, we are now being rewarded for being focused. But at the same time, like you say, how do you balance that need with always having that, I guess, component of decentralization so that you can adapt if anything like a pandemic comes across that derails it?
Absolutely. I think that's such a great question. And my thought on that is that it would go back to the idea that I fielded earlier around fourfold sustainability. And why do I say that? It's because when it comes down to it and you have lots of different choices to make, so for example, like 50 experiments versus 3, I think it's really worthwhile to focus on what makes you as an organization who you are. So what's kind of like your core values that are really maybe alive? What are your deep capacities that you have that you've already you've spent a lot of time developing product from it or developing service from it, and going back to not losing touch with who you are as an organization, of what your purpose is, in making the choice between what kind of experiments you're going to field. So, if the 50 experiments or however many you had were all kind of differentiations of like who you are as an organization deeply, then, I would expect the revenue to be, to be higher. But the fact that it wasn't, and that the 3, would just give me a sense that those 3 were probably more aligned with something about what you are really good at as an organization. But that's just a thought.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think the 50 experiments was chasing shiny object syndrome from the previous person in charge. And no, I like that point. So thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. All right, Daniela.
Thank you, and thanks for this, I would say, challenging thought process here. So here's my question. It has to do a little bit, I put up a few questions in there, but they're around the culture and the dynamics that you put there as a hallmark for a cast, basically. So the question is as follows. Say you start as a small organization and perhaps you're churning and trying to grow and become more decentralized, start getting to this deeply cohesive culture you described. My pondering right now is what happens if in the process of not being a complex adaptive system, right, you have maybe lost that edge of creativity, very dynamic people. These are basically people that will not settle for the status quo, that are always thinking outside the box. But if the culture you set early on by default excluded such a group, how do you reacquire that edge and sort of shift existing dynamic to something that's a bit more, and can that be done over and over again? And I will say the COVID situation was an interesting test bed, if you will, right? Because it all of a sudden, whatever you thought about yourself as an organization as being dynamic and on edge and able to adapt, that was really truly put to the test once you were forced to adapt and you realized, maybe I'm not so good at this, or maybe I'm really good at this. I should do this more often because look at the benefits, right? But I'm curious how you see this, having the right culture in with the right people to continue growing that dynamic. That's the right dynamic.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And, again, I'm just responding in a general manner as to how I would think about it, not suggesting that might be the case or not. But I think that so one thing that I do believe that's true of any truly sustainable organization is that once that organization has created a particular kind of DNA that's truly animating the organization, then it can almost like set the direction of a market. If things are really resonant, if truly what the culture is an alive culture, then regardless of how the market is changing, it should be able to adapt to it. Which the question that, or the thought that comes up for me is that to what degree is that culture really a living culture? So when an organization says that it's really good at service, is it just lip service, or is it really, really good at service? So how do you really figure out how you kind of may understand your culture, whether that's really a living thing, or is it just something that's a process, or is it just something that doesn't really have wheels, but everybody just believes that that's how it operates when it doesn't really operate. And so that's one thought that comes to my mind. But second, to what the situation that you posed, where you may have developed a culture along a certain kind of direction, and then you need a different kinds of people to help adapt that may not be in your cultural imprint. And I think that's always an opportunity, because no matter what your core is, but for it to be sustainable, as we see in any kind of like sustainable physical, biological, chemical, civilizational system, no matter what degree it's in, it has to have all kinds of capacities that exist in the culture. Now they might be serving whatever it is that your purpose is, or the core aspect of your culture, but you still need like different kinds of people and capacities to make that more alive and dynamic. And if you don't, then that's an opportunity to, without departing from your culture, just strengthening your culture by pulling those people in. But so that's some thoughts I have on it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thanks, Prabir. So we have a really great question from Jinan, and it was applauded and noticed very well in the comment section or the chat. It was, every person who joins the company should affect change in the culture as well as becoming part of it. What's the right balance to evolve and grow without losing the core culture?
Yeah. This, to me, this is like similar to the last question, in that, I think that every organization is, hopefully it's unique. There's something different about each organization that might be the result of, how it was founded and the ideas that kind of developed it. And I think it's really important when a new person joins the organization, for that core to be completely kind of assimilated without losing that person's individuality or what they can uniquely offer. So it becomes a balancing act, of course, because we've got to understand whatever it is that the organization is really good at. That's got to become like a standard thing that everyone assimilates or understands very deeply. And then at the same time, there has to be leeway for creativity along kind of that uniqueness, and there should be lots of opportunities for that. When you just think about it generally, but again, every particular situation is different. But that's how I would think about it.
And someone else said, do you need to be able to take a hard left turn, or like they're starting new, or incrementally adjust?
That's
Fitzgerald asked that, and if we'd like for him to expound on that, we can ask him.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Christopher?
Yeah.
Thank you. I was unmuting. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, thank you. The challenge we face is all too often it's this kind of idea of is it really incremental changes, or literally almost stepping back like you were a startup and saying, if I were doing this brand new today, would I make a hard left turn? Would I wake up this morning and say, hey, is this how the business changes? And so part of that adaptive, I think you talk about adaptive culture, is to being able to kind of step back and do that turn. And I think all too often we get set in the modeling incremental along a path, and we didn't step up and say, wait a minute, why am I doing this morning? In your COVID comment, someone had this there, is the ones that kind of did a hard turn in COVID stopped and said, wait a minute, something changed this morning. My supply chain changed. My access changed. If I were a startup, I would think differently. And it's almost putting that startup mindset on every morning you wake up.
Yeah. I think that's really well said. And I think that it's that's such a difficult question to answer, because it's all about balance. I mean, how do you keep who you are as an organization, that core of it, assuming that it's a living core, and then yet be able to make the turns required in the environment. And I think that the safe answer or the safe approach that I would recommend is making experiments on that left turn kind of trajectory. So where you're doing a turn, but not investing like a tremendous amount, if that's possible. Is just beginning to see if that's going to have wheels, that direction, and running some finite experiments, and then just putting more and more money as that kind of shows that it's going to be a reasonable return on it. But again, it's easy for me to say that without understanding the situation that you're in, and so that's but how it just the only thoughts that I have at the moment. So.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Pravir. All right, we have time for one more. Christopher Yang is raising his hand.
I want to say thank you for the wonderful presentation. I do have one specific question related to the simulation that you mentioned earlier. Achieve the superlinear complex adaptive system, right? That we look at the 4 pillars. I was wondering if, do you factor in any outside dynamic parameters? Because given that to achieve about average business outcome, sometimes you need to look into changes in the market, resource, and things related to like macroeconomics and political environmental changes. So how do you factor in those levers and making sure that you're achieving the optimal outcomes? And the second part of the question is, if you are making those changes, what's the frequency that you rerun those simulations to make sure that you're on the right track?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you. So I think the more information one has, the better always the simulation is going to be. And if I refer back to, you probably will not remember the slide, but I had a slide on kind of sensing and acting in the market. And there was some pricing plays, but what changed it up to 3 times a day. It was a big data problem. So we continually had a lot of data feeding in, and we would run algorithms and make changes 3 times a day.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, sorry, we can't hear you, Ashley.
Pravir, while we're waiting for
Yes.
the technical difficulties, may I ask you one quick question that some others had asked too?
Yeah.
How big is your team that works on all of these fabulous simulations and this work?
So, at different times it's been different sizes, but the maximum size it's been is about 10 people.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
I guess we can wait. We can wait for one more question. Pravir, would you like to take another question?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah.
Perfect.
I have a question. It's Janan. How much does competitive intelligence play into your ongoing assessment of the market and changes? What role do you have for competitive intelligence?
Yeah, it's depending on, so for example, I used to, prior to my current role, I used to head pricing operations at Zappos.